Welcome to Cage Free Voices Radio, an innovative educational entertainment radio show where youth and young adults have the opportunity to see themselves even if the world is blind. Listen, guys, I am really excited for this episode. This month, we're doing an entire series on cage-free women in leadership. And today we're focused on winning in tech with Diya Wynn. And so just to give you an introduction to this powerhouse, I'm going to give you a little bit of her bio. Feel free to put comments in the chat, or if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will get to them as soon as we can. There's a lot to discuss today. So Diya Wynn is Artificial Intelligence Ethics Lead for emerging technologies and intelligence platforms at Amazon Web Services. She has worked in technology for 25 years, building, delivering, and leading in early and growth stage companies. She has a passion for developing current and emerging leaders, promoting STEM to the underrepresented, and driving diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. After spending years in technology-focused roles and separately pursuing passion projects in DEI, she now has a role marrying the best of both worlds as principal machine learning ethicist at Amazon Web Services. In this capacity, she is responsible for defining strategy and engaging with customers to mitigate risk and promote standards for responsible use of artificial. In addition to her work in technology, Diya is an ambassador for inclusion and diversity, a pioneer in the company leading the Women in Professional Services, and advisor for the Black Employee Network in Professional Services, AWS's first business unit aligned affinity groups. For her model of leadership, she was awarded a Pathfinder Award by Sungard Availability Services, WWCO Inclusion Ambassador Award, and was a 2020 finalist for the Women in IT Awards Advocate of the Year. She also presented at the United Nations General Assembly Conference 2020 on Women Empowerment and Gender Equality. I was there for that, and I saw that presentation. It was phenomenal. While technology has been an important part of her life since the third grade, Diya lives to make a difference in the projects she engages and the lives of those she encounters. She's a giver in every way, and her community service reflects the appreciation that she has for life and the opportunities afforded her. Over the years, Diya has served in capacities including board member of community organizations, leader in her local church, and a mayoral appointee in environmental affairs in Laurel, Maryland for 6 consecutive years. My dear, you are busy. She currently serves as the president of the National Alumnae Association of Spelman College, Southern Maryland chapter, is a lifetime member of NAASC, mentors students at Spelman College, Tulane University School of Professional Advancement and Global Mentorship Initiative, and is on the board of Changing Destinations Journey to Excellence. Diya, say something to the people. You have to unmute your mic.
Thank you. Right. We should know how to do this since we've been doing this for the last year or so with COVID-19. Thank you. You said you were going to read a little bit, not all of it. I was like, that's enough. That's enough. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and always appreciate opportunities really to be able to share a little bit of my journey, but also hopefully to encourage others. So thank you so much for having me, Bathsheba.
Thank you for being here. And I didn't want to miss any of this awesomeness. So once I got started, I couldn't stop. So Diya, in the words of Carl Carlton, you are a bad mama jamma as the ethics lead for emerging technologies and intelligence platforms for Amazon Web Services. You definitely broke out of some cages, Diya. I'm curious to know how your mind functioned as a child. To land you on a path such as this one. How did you perceive the world at an early age, and what curiosities did you have?
So it's interesting you say that. So, my mom used to call me, or my nickname when I was a little girl was Diya Do. And so I was always doing something. That probably wasn't necessarily intended to be positive, but I guess you could see that that's followed with me over the course of the years, I'm always doing something. I think, what did I think about it? It's probably hard to sort of think back to what was I thinking as a child and how I perceived the world. But I'll tell you this, early in my career, and you, Bathsheba, you heard this a little bit from the UN, I received a computer for getting the highest reading and math scores in my school at the time. And so that was an opportunity, or that was the introduction for me to technology, me being exposed to technology and computers, something that I had not seen, had not imagined, and it created a new world for me. So in the third grade at 8, I decided I was going to be in technology, right? I said I was going to be a computer engineer. That was my thing. And so, I've not changed.
Wow.
Nothing about me has changed. I said at 8 years old, I'm gonna be in technology, and that's what I've been doing ever since. Went to school in computer science at Spelman College, and that's what I studied, and got a bachelor's in in computer science and a minor in mathematics. And I have been going in IT ever since. So what was I thinking? Well, I thought I was going to be a computer engineer, and I kind of set my mind on that. But the reason why I bring that up really is about exposure, because I believe that, and I got this from one of my old pastors. He said, you only rise to the level that you've been exposed, right? And so if we don't expose our children, if we don't expose women and young girls and young boys to opportunities, to new experiences, to new people, then they're hitting a ceiling, right? And so it's really, really important. That's why I do stuff like this, or I go and go to career fairs and I talk to young people. This week, we're in the middle of the Girls in AI Hackathon. We got young girls from 12 to 18 being exposed to technology so that they can open their minds to opportunities that they may not have ever seen. I didn't have people in my family that were in tech. Nobody was business women and businessmen in my family. We didn't have people in corporate jobs, right? So this was like completely outside of my family members are teachers, right? Like my teachers, and I had a nurse, and that was acceptable, right? You could be a teacher, you could be a homemaker as a woman, maybe a nurse, but nothing more than that. And so it was that exposure that created an opportunity for me to think beyond what my circumstance or what my environment was telling me I should be or I could be.
I love that you said, like, you can't rise beyond the level of exposure. Somebody shared that with you, because I was thinking, like, when I was in the third grade, I was exposed to this program that I still kind of work with now. And I started to think to myself, like, wow, you wouldn't know that you could possibly be an opera singer if you're not exposed to the opera, right? And so this individual that gives you the computer kind of ignites what's already in you. I'm still curious to know, what was Diya doing? Like, what kinds of things were you doing that got you the name Diya Do? Because
take apart stuff, mess with things. I think I just was active, and that's true of the person I am now, right? I don't sit still. There's there's no grass growing under my feet. I am always doing something. And so part of that is a little bit of like, there was experiences I had as a young child that wanted me or made me feel like I had to obtain self-worth in doing. That's not the vision that I'm in now. And I recognize that the stuff that I don't make me the person that I am. But now my giving back, now my doing is really about, helping build into others. And so whether that is with my family and the kinds of things that I like to try to engage or expose my children to, we go different places. We couldn't go anywhere this summer, but this summer we went virtually to Africa, right? And so we spent time doing things, looking for opportunities to expose them, as well as expose my broader community, my broader family to new opportunities. And so I think as a child, I was just busy. I was a busybody, is what my mom call it.
A busybody. And I think that's a testament to parents who may have children who are very busy, that they may be, that busyness may be indicative of the gift that they have within them and what they will end up doing in the future, which helps me kind of segue into my next question. Could you share with us some of your experiences. So we're moving past like your childhood, and we're moving into, you actually, well, I think you have always been a part of this field. Like you say, you started in third grade messing with computers. Could you share with us some of the experiences you've had as an African-American woman working in the technology field? What obstacles have you had to face to get to where you are now?
Yeah, that's so what obstacles? I think, the biggest thing that I would think about is just being the only. So what obstacles did I have to face to get here, right? Well, it is, you being the only one, you standing out, you being different. And so that's been a challenge. Now, I'll tell you that I went to a predominantly white high school. I went to a boarding school. And so you would think that I had a little notion of being the only. There was 13, maybe 15 people of color, Blacks and Hispanics, that were there out of a school of 300. We were in a town that didn't have any Black people in it at all. Right?
Wow.
Black people, not even the janitors or the or folks that were cooks, right? None. And so I had that exposure from 9th grade to 12th grade. So you would think, well, maybe you kind of used to this a little bit. Then I went off to school in Atlanta. And so I was in sort of what I would call the Mecca, right? We had HBCUs that kind of gave me the inner sort of strength and empowerment. And we had the support of sort of our collective being there with the other students or other schools in the AUC. And so that gave you a little sort of inner strength and courage that I came out of college with. But then you get into a workforce where there aren't people that look like you, right? I didn't have, and after my first job out of college, I did not have a black manager. Didn't have a Black manager. That was my first Black male, 1997. After that, never had a Black manager. Never had a woman manager. Right. So you don't see yourself, in the I didn't have a Black or a Black woman or man, or even a woman that was a mentor to me in the business field. Right. And so some of those are challenges.
Wow.
People don't expect you to thrive. People don't open doors for you necessarily in your field or your career. I was a manager at an earlier age, and I had, white men tell me that they weren't going to listen to me, because I was Black or because I was young or because I was a woman. I mean, all of those things. And so, you come into with a passion, I think, for technology, and then you get experience to kind of the real world, right? What happens around you. And so I think all of those are barriers, and we encounter that. And then those are the obstacles are also the barriers that you tell yourself, right? I'm not good enough. Maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe, because everyone perceives that you can't do or whatever, that starts to create, obstacles for you. But I think, like I said, the inner sort of strength and fortitude of going to a school that believed in you and is going to, create what I would call Black girl magic. I mean, it's not magic, but you understand. Having sort of the strength and courage of my faith, I'm not going to be stopped. I tell this story. When I was in high school, I ran for student council for 2 years, student government for 2 years in a row. And I lost, right? And so somebody was like, oh, you're a big failure. You can't win, and you leave it alone. And I remember that.
Wow.
I remember that my one of my advisors wrote in my recommendation for school, she tells the story of me losing, and how she saw a tenacity in me that I would not be stopped. And so even though I thought I had a goal to make a difference, I continued to make a difference. I found other ways. I continued to give in other ways and volunteer to make a difference in the school. And it's that kind of inner sort of fortitude for me that, in spite of what I was seeing around me, in spite of the missing pictures, I was determined. I wasn't going to let my 2 failures in the past, if you want to call those failures, my 2 failures in the past stop me. And now I'm not going to let, a misstep or a mistake or the perceptions of others be what stops me from accomplishing what I believe God has given me to do. And part that is, and so even at work, and we don't call that ministry necessarily, but my work for me is part of my ministry, part of my ability to make a difference. Yes, to open doors, to create spaces for people that come after me. And so in my mind, I am not going to be stopped. Yes, I hit some roadblocks. Yes, I encounter some obstacles. We turn obstacles into stepping stones. And I have that kind of confidence now, not necessarily that I always had, but I always have had a little bit of a push, a little that I wasn't going to, be deterred. It looked different than the confidence, of course, I have at this stage in my career. But yes, being the only is difficult. There's some days where that's not easy. And when you know that you're encountering people that don't necessarily desire you to be there, right? But I'm determined, right, like to show that I belong here just like you do.
That's so you said some very there are critical pieces in a lot of what you said, but I want to start off with, like, most people think being first, right, is like glorious, but the person who is first has to create the trail. They have to deal with all the obstacles that come with being first. And so I hear that in your story, that tenacity that you had in being, in blazing this trail and being the only, where, you talk a lot about your faith. Was your faith a part of, was that instrumental in the process, like since you were in third grade, or, did it come into play later on? Because I think this is important for young people, because, they get excited. They're like, I want to do this. And as soon as they hit a stumbling block, it's like, this is not for me. It must not be for me because I'm constantly being rejected. So what kind of spurred you on toward, continuing to push and move forward? Was it your faith, or was it, and if it was, were there other things that factored into the equation?
So yes, faith for me has always been a part of my journey. My grandmother kept us in church. We're from old school church, so there was church almost every day of the week. And so, yes, I think church for me has always been a part. And for me, that was a safe place when all the other things in the world were challenging, difficult. I grew up poor. We had, all kinds of sort of conditions that would be not conducive to, being and excelling, right? Everything about my upbringing says I shouldn't be where I am, but I recognize that, my past doesn't have to predict my future. And so, yes, growing up poor, I grew up poor in the South Bronx. We had drugs and other situations in our family. We moved every other year, either because we were being put out or running for something, right? Like that is the reality of my past, but that's not what I have to be. That doesn't dictate who I am. And I got that from my faith. And even with all that we were going through, my grandmother and even my mom, she, became a teacher and was very serious about education. And so those sorts of things are kind of the grounding and the root for having, a level of tenacity. The other thing that I've learned is like we kind of kick ourselves about failures but I think the only things that are truly failures are the things that we don't learn from. And so, yes, I may not have made the right decision at the time. And I try to make, the best decisions with all the information that I have. But then what do you do with what you've experienced now? What do you do with what you learn? And I think, again, a lot of that has been rooted in what I believe has been my faith journey. And then having some strong, even though I didn't have the examples of, technical or corporate women, around me, my aunt, my grandmother, and my mother were strong women who said, you can be all you can be. And my son doesn't want to say that now, right? But the reality is some of those messages are necessary. And then when you start understanding the history that we come from, when I say I'm talking about people of color, we weren't always, it wasn't always about, the poor countries of Africa where everybody with flies swatting around them and stuff like that. No, the great kings and queens,
right?
History, when you start to understand and see the resilience of even the slaves through that season and what they were able to endure to build nations, not just this nation, but all across the country. The economies that exist in countries would not be so if it wasn't for slaves, people of color that built economies. Like when we start to understand that, and even though they tell us that we're less than, but you recognize how they used us because they knew what strength we had, because they knew what our skill was, because they understood how we nurtured and cared for children, and that's why they gave us their children to care for and to raise. Like we're not people that are less than, right?
Yeah, we're not inferior.
If you realize how they use it wasn't because we were inferior. They wouldn't have used us that way if we were inferior. It's because we were superior. We brought something to the table. And so when we start to understand that, then you know you've got something. We all have something, right? We're all gifted with something, and we've got to let the stories that they continue to tell us in history stop hindering us from being all God intended us to be. There's so much more. I believe in all of us, and we just have to be reminded of or being taught what that is instead of the lies in history that we often get propagated to us. We're much more than that.
What's key to one of the things that you said was that, although the women in your family hadn't gone this route, they didn't have the background, they still were instrumental in the process, and they still were able to kind of inspire you to become who you are right now. And so I think that speaks to parents, and I think about my mom, because I grew up poor, and we didn't have a lot. I grew up in downtown Newport News, but although my mom was not a teacher, she was not a teacher. She didn't even finish, she didn't finish community college. She would have us walk to the library all the time. Like, we would walk for blocks upon blocks just to go to the library and sit in the library all day reading books while she was doing whatever research she was doing for herself. And so there are some very practical things that parents and those people who are mentors to young people can do, even if they don't have the level of expertise they think is necessary for them to help their child or their students.
Absolutely, Betsy. But you know what I think about, and I hope my mom doesn't mind me telling me the story, but you talk about tenacity and sort of like that. So my mom, initially didn't have her degree either. And so she had kids and was going through college while she had her children, while we were in, when she didn't have, resources and stuff like that. She took a number of years, but she finished her bachelor's, right? Like, I think it was 8 years or something like that took her. That's not the normal time frame, but my mother persevered, right? And she did that. And then the next example, I remember her then going to get her master's, and then she had 2 masters, right? And so it was like, that again is an example of, not giving up, not giving into your circumstance, and continuing to persevere. And so those are examples, again, like you say, that I have, that even though it wasn't, my mom in tech, I get to see her witness before me. And so she could do that over a number of years. I could do this too, right?
Yeah, that's good. That is good. Another thing, that I've learned from watching my mom, is long suffering. I think that a lot of our young people, they don't know what it means to suffer long. They want that instant gratification, and so I've told some of my students when, they come and they say, this is going on at home and this is going on at home. And I'm like, trust and believe that I've had some very similar circumstances. Many of the circumstances that you are encountering right now, I've had to go through. And so I'm not saying that there's no reason for you to, to not have assignments turned in, but let's make sure we don't turn that into an excuse. And so being able to see other strong women or other strong people around us, or to hear those stories, we have to begin sharing more of our stories so kids can know, or teens can know that, I can do this too. I told my students, I said, listen, I did my homework with no lights, I did my homework with the lights off, with every, when there were times that the lights were turned off, or if there was a storm and the lights were out, like, I still was responsible for getting those assignments in. So I love that you shared that. And then just the fact that, with our history and being able to look at the positive side of and the strengths that we have, as opposed to spending so much time on the challenges and focusing on those challenges that we kind of cripple ourselves and make it difficult for us to move forward because we're focusing too much on those things. So I love that you shared that.
One other thing that I want to mention, because you said this, right? At some point, we have to be willing, or we have to decide that we're no longer going to be a victim, right? And we could sit in all of the experiences that we had, all of the bad, all of the, we could rest in that. We could sit in that, and that will cripple us. That will prevent us from seeing, a future, a positive future, and being able to achieve our goals. And at some point you say, well, yeah, that was my past.
Yep.
I'm not going to continue to sit in that. I'm not going to be a victim. And I heard a woman say this earlier this week, and she said, I don't take on that victim mentality, right? And I mean, that's not to discount or not acknowledge what we've experienced and some of the things that have been done to us as a people and in our communities, right? But at some point we've got to say, okay, now it stops, right?
The buck stops here.
Right, exactly. And really set our hearts or our minds in a direction really to achieve. I'm going to change victim to victor.
Yeah.
I'm going to change victim to victory. And when do we make that, start to make that shift? And so it's not, yes, I've had some of those things. I could rest in that, but no. It's time that I use that. Okay, yes, it was difficult, and it means that I've got to put a little bit more in it to get to where I need to be. But I don't have to let that be the end or that be the story.
Absolutely. I remember one of my supervisors saying, she said, the moment you go from victim to victor, you embrace your power. Like, you realize that you are in control of your circumstances and how well you'll do, instead of giving the power to someone else and saying it's because of them, this didn't work. And that really kind of, rocked my poverty mentality, So I love that. And so now I want to get to the fact that you are doing your thing in artificial intelligence, and there, like you said, you are one of very few, and you are also you're a part of making sure that the ethics involved in creating artificial intelligence are definitely put into place. And so a lot of young people are not familiar with ethics. Could you define ethics and why ethics are important in the field of technology, specifically artificial intelligence?
Yeah. So, I mean, if we think about ethics kind of in a broad context, that's just a way of thinking, sort of policy structures, value around values and moral principles. But when we talk about that, from the perspective of technology, ethics or tech ethics, you might hear, or artificial intelligence, this really is an emerging area.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about us really trying to ensure that there is diverse and equitable, inclusive, inclusivity when we start looking at how we leverage AI, that we can trust the systems, the automation, the tech that's driving, so that we can eliminate human bias. And ensure that there is, equitable use, and it's not doing harm in our communities. It's particularly important with artificial intelligence, I think, because machine learning, because people don't realize how much artificial intelligence and machine learning is already in use. The more that we have data that is available and accessible online and in all of our connected systems, the more that there's a potential for artificial intelligence to perpetuate biases and inequities, right? When we think about racism and prejudice and institutional or systemic inequity that has permeated our history in our countries for a very long time, that limits our access to power, right? Mm-hmm. It limits resources and opportunities. And if we think about artificial intelligence now creating or having the potential to use data and historical data to perpetuate those inequities and continue to eliminate access and
stereotypes,
right? then that becomes, a serious risk. And a lot of us don't realize it, right? Like, we have AI being used everywhere. It's being noticed more in conversation today, but everything that you use on Facebook, a lot of the features, the ads that we see, whose information we see on our feed in Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and like all across social media, artificial intelligence is being used. Machine learning is being used in our recommendation engines when they recommend certain products after you've bought something, or you get an email that says, that these products would be suggested to you. That's AI. We have AI in our refrigerators and on our, our flavors of AI in our refrigerators, and, in our devices, on our sinks, and in our devices that talk to us on our arms and in our homes, right? Like, it is all over the place. Our credit system, our credit scoring and stuff like that is based on algorithms, right? All of that's been used for years, but the use of that is increasing. And now we have even more data that we're giving people access to us about us all the time. When you use our social media, you create data that now is available to the masses. When you search on our search engines, there's now data being contributed, our patterns of behavior that are being given and available to masses, right? Like, there's so much data at work, and we don't want that stuff to be used in ways that will continue to propagate that bias. Now, I'm of the mind that technology can be used for good. Like we were in the midst of the pandemic, right? COVID-19, the vaccines that just came out, they were able to do that in record time, in part because of artificial intelligence, right? So there are positive use cases that we see. We have folks using artificial intelligence on the West Coast so that they can look at one of the energy companies, so they can look at the power grid in their systems and figure out where there are faulty or potential for faulty systems, to be able to determine, the potential for risk, and that would create right? Like, there are real uses that are positive, but we also got to get a handle on, where our data is being used or misused, and how it can be used in other places in not so positive ways, or to perpetuate bias. And if we're not intentionally having people in the room to think about that, and having more diverse perspectives at the table that influence how it's being used, then we're at risk of continuing to perpetuate these bias. That's why artificial intelligence ethics is so important. That's why the work that I'm doing and others like myself is so critical. That's why it's important to having women and people of color, Blacks and Hispanics at the table, Native Americans being a part of that conversation, so that those that are marginalized don't get continue to be marginalized, because it has the potential to level the playing field if we just make decisions.
So how is it possible, like, in terms of facial recognition software, right? Is it possible for bias to intrude into the process of creating algorithms for facial recognition software where, it leans more toward one race rather than another?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So here's the thing, right? We as individuals have bias. We all do, right? We can't eliminate that. We manage it, right? Or we learn to interrupt our biases, right? And so there are studies that there are studies that are out there. There's a whole implicit bias test that talks about us being able to have bias and helps you to uncover and see where your biases exist. We all have them. The problem or the challenge with algorithms and artificial intelligence is that you now give the data over and the machines over to start making some of those decisions. And that's why humans in the loop, or humans involved, to make sure that we're not just leaving these decisions to look at historical data, because the data has, over time, or a lot of the data can be infused with bias, some of that which is from people and processes and systems. So for instance, we know we have redlining, and we know what redlining has done, and we know that inevitably has created urban centers where there are populations of people that typically are Blacks and other people of color.
So pause real quick. So for the young people who are watching this and are going to watch this, could you explain redlining to them?
Right. So it basically was a system where we have identified or people, a policy or structures that identify a community where they would eliminate resources, for that community, because they wanted to ensure that whites were protected in certain areas that they were in. So they said, we won't allow you to live outside into these communities. This is where you're allowed. And basically, when that sort of those lines were drawn, financial resources were not provided to those communities. So you can't buy homes. We won't give you credit. We won't give you access. So remember, we're talking about access to resources, right?
Residential segregation.
This was eliminated, for those communities. But what that did was now it created urban centers, right, that we have. So like, Baltimore and Harlem and such, we have these centers now that are created. And so based on that, we get to exclude and continue to eliminate services, right? And so then historically over time, you now have more poverty, you have more crime, you have all these other things that are happening in those environments. If we use that data, right, as the basis for now making future decisions, it's already been infused with a certain level of bias because we've restricted access. So
break it down.
We were restricted access to financial resources. So of course, they're lower income there. We restricted, access to the proper schools and resources needed for schools. So of course, everybody in that environment, or a lot of the people in that environment, have a lower education. But now we're going to make decisions based on that data, which was sort of systemically structured for inequity. If we base our decisions, future decisions, using that data, well, it's already infused with a level of inequity and bias. That's where the problem exists, right? So we've got to sort of circumvent that. And so when you go back to like recognition or any other algorithms that were created, looking and understanding what data they're using and what's the basis for that data, what other things that have happened historically that created that dynamic is important, because that then again is what will perpetuate or continue the cycle going forward. And that's what we want to interrupt.
Whew, this is good stuff. So for all the young people who are navigating different types of technology, how would you advise them on pinpointing their specific passion in this vast and promising field? It's obvious that new careers are emerging due to technological changes. How should they chart their course in terms of academic planning?
Yeah, so the thing that I would say, right, is the first thing is take advantage of opportunities to be exposed. We were talking about that in the beginning. And so that means, say yes to some things that you didn't think, you might like. Try some things, be willing to explore new opportunities, because those may open up, your awareness, kind of like what you were just talking about earlier, Bathsheba, about knowing about opera, right? Black Violin is this musical group that people weren't aware of, and they're using and infusing, kind of hip hop and stuff into classical music in ways. Right? They had to have been exposed in some way to know that they could take two genres of music that normally wouldn't come together to be able to use them together, and they use their passion and interest in that in order to create this new sort of beautiful music, right? But they were exposed. And so the thing that I'm saying is for young people is to, we like the things that we like, and sometimes we don't want to be open to new opportunities or new things. I'm saying embrace something new, be willing to be exposed, take the challenge in looking at, something different, something new, because that may in fact open up a new area for you. Learn about yourself in ways to so that you can kind of find out what your passion is. What's the thing that is uniquely you, right? All of us have a gift. All of us have something that everybody says, yeah, that's really you. You, Bathsheba, with your poetry, and somebody else with their interest in song. But like tapping into what's uniquely you. And then I think the other bit of it is finding a way to tie those kind of superpowers, the thing that is unique about you, to a need that we have in the world, right? A need that we have in our community. Because when you create that, when you recognize the need and you use what you're passionate about and put those things together, there's a demand that you then begin to fill. Right? So, but the other thing I would say is be a continual learner. And I say this often, like that is one of my sort of values and core strengths is learning. And I look for opportunity to learn new things. Every encounter with people, I think for me is an opportunity to learn, and it's an opportunity to like have an encounter that could make a difference. And so I like to look for, and I tell and encourage people to look for opportunities to learn, because some of the things that you're learning now, it may not be as useful tomorrow. And there are new things that are coming, new careers, new technology. And so if you stop with what you've learned in high school and you stop there, then you're going to be irrelevant in 4 years.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Those skills that you learn may not be useful. Yes, we need math, and yes, we need reading. You need that. But then beyond that, you've got to be willing to kind of look at what else is happening. We got folks now, who like to draw, but didn't realize that they could be making, art with artificial intelligence, or that they could be using their art in ways to create on computers and create games. And so you got to be willing to learn and sort of embrace and continuing to learn. There are always new skills. The other thing that I would encourage is, and I say this sometimes, is that, it's one thing, and yes, artificial intelligence and automation are changing how we do business, right? Changing the world in which we work. And there are some things that are going to go away, right? Like we're not going to need somebody let's say the librarian to search, the catalog for us, when we can go in and type that in and it happens for ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. We may not need someone who's a tech to go read, an X-ray when the artificial intelligence and systems can tell you exactly what the X-ray sees. But we still need doctors, right, to be able to perform and treat people. We need people to be able to take that information and interact and engage with others. We always need people in like this with soft skills and there's nothing that you can do with a machine that's going to treat people who have mental illness or have right. or have abuse have abused drugs or whatever. Like there is always a people aspect that's going to be required regardless of what technology does. And so when you build up soft skills and you can engage and you can talk to people and you understand motivations and the heart of individuals, there's always a place for that kind of work. And so that's another thing that people can consider.
I was reading this book some years ago that talked about how one of the major factors that separates us from artificial intelligence is the human ability to be creative. And so I know that a lot of institutions are removing, those elements like performing arts or, when it comes to cutting their budgets, but that's critical too. So I think, a lot of what you said, you're muted, but a lot of what you said is definitely on point, because we have to begin to think about, be present in the moment, but also think about the future. So continuing that lifelong learning process. And I want to say to those students who, because we're talking about, exposure, we've been talking about exposure a lot. Do not think that, because both Diya and I grew up in very impoverished environments. Do not think that because you might not have the ability to travel, that you cannot still be exposed to different types of experiences. Look at the advent of, of technology and the internet. If you have an interest in a specific area, you can actually go online and there are virtual tours. Diya said that she went to Africa virtually. You can ask your parents or your parent to, or whomever it is, your guardian, to help you find and navigate through, online content so that you can kind of be exposed to some things since you have limited resources due to redlining.
Listen, but what you're saying is so right? And that is the beauty of technology right now, right? That most of us have a cell phone, a smartphone. Like not when I grew up, because when I was young, I didn't have a smartphone. It wasn't like that wasn't there. Mama didn't have a cell phone. Like having a cell phone came a little later.
Yeah, I got a cell phone at 19. I purchased it myself.
But some of us have at early ages, we have smartphones in our pockets. We're walking with more computing power than, I had in my home in that first computer that I was talking about. And so there was so much available to us online that we could just Google it. That's my kids, favorite term. They're talking about Google it. Every time they turn around, either they're talking to Google or they're Googling it. But there's so much available to us at our fingertips. Even when, like you said, we have lack in resources that the internet provides. And during COVID-19 and with this pandemic, there have been so many additional resources put and made available online for people so that we could continue to explore. And I've seen a number of like free virtual tours. You could tour the Louvre Museum and
yeah, my daughter and I went.
Like that. Like they're opening up so much that is free that we actually can take advantage of directly online. So I think that was a great point, Bathsheba, to highlight, is that getting and the lack of financial resources or being in poverty doesn't have to limit us, especially when we have technology in our pocket now. Right. We can really do a lot to gain information and to continue to learn.
And I know it seems like I'm harping on this point, but I really want young people to get this, because if you are not exposed, just imagine like you are the next Beethoven. You're the next Beethoven, but you haven't been introduced to classical music. You haven't been introduced to that kind of environment. Then you remain caged to who you are because you have not been exposed to even know that that's possible. So that exposure is critical. And when I was younger, I didn't wait for mentors to find me. I sought them out. So you don't have to wait for people to find you or to take interest in what you're doing. You can seek out the people that you desire to learn from.
You were a little bolder than I was because I didn't seek them out. I just was like, oh, well, I didn't have them. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah, but thank you so much. So last question, Diya. This has been phenomenal. What makes you cage free in your life, and how you? What makes you cage free in your life, and how you approach learning?
Listen, I would still say to you, that's my faith, right? I am a firm believer that in Christ I'm free.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of that's what that's with knowing that I have been given potential, purpose, and so I seek opportunities to live that out every day, and that comes from being rooted in a faith and an assurance that I've been created in the image of God, and He has placed something in me, and so. For me, that's really the foundation, the heart of it. And then, like I said, we want to take a step from there. Then it is knowing that that we all have been given something unique and a gift, and we come from greatness, right? We come from great resilience. And so, I stand on the shoulders of, our ancestors, my family, the ones that I know, like right behind me, my grandmother who came from the South with working in the fields to come to New York City, right? And people like that who help, remind me of who we are and what we can become. And so I think that for me is what would keep me, what keeps me cage free, right? And then it is the opportunity we want to create for all of you, right? The opportunity that we don't think we have the luxury of being bound when
you better say that again. Wait. Oh, I need to quote that. Say that again.
I said, I don't believe that we have the luxury of being bound when we have a future that is depending on us to open doors, to blaze trails, and to create opportunity for them.
That is so good. I'm trying to memorize it, download it in my head so I can remember to quote it later. But
We're gonna have to play this back because I just made that up. So
that's Holy Spirit fire right there.
But I believe that. I do.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, guys. Thank you, Diya, for sharing so many nuggets. Thank you so much for joining us in this episode on Winning in Tech. If you would like to find out more about Diya Wynn, follow her on social media at Diya Wynn on Facebook. Oh, and don't forget to just check out how incredible she is. Any events that she's doing, she most likely will probably have them posted on her Facebook page. I know she is a freaking busy woman. Diya do. So I'm still
doing. That's right. I thought about that this morning. I was like, that was my mom used to call me that. I guess I haven't lived. We have to be careful what we name our folks. We live into it. We live into it, right?
That's even with my name is Bathsheba, and I used to be like, it means daughter of promise. That's right. One of my college friends says, that ain't a benefit to you. She was like, that means you're a benefit to somebody else. And I was like,
it's good either way. It's good both ways. But that's it's important, right? What we call ourselves, what we call those around us, right? We're giving them names that we want them to live into. And so, yeah, I just, it was funny that I thought about that. And I was like, yeah, I'm still doing.
Yep, still doing.
What we doing to make a difference.
Yeah, we're certainly making a difference. Stay tuned for the next episode. And if you like what you heard and would like your children to be involved in Cage-Free Voices online learning, feel free to reach us at cfbonlinelearning.com. All right, guys, remember to see yourself even if the world is blind. Reflect, connect, and transcend every internal and external barrier that would try to cage your voice. Remember, be cage-free and be like Diya do.
Wonderful, Bathsheba. Thank you.
Thank you.